then ran away for a locum job down in London to pick up a few more skills. And so was working at a hospital in northwest London from November onwards, and just recently have run back up the M40 to Oxford and joined the team in Oxford, as was always the plan or the hope.
And we should say that that hospital in London was the Hammersmith Hospital. So
indeed,
this started in London and Surrey and various other places close to London. What was your experience then in March? When this started?
It was busy. It was real. Lots about it was very, very difficult. So, we were there in London, and I remember the first cases came as a trickle, and we'd seen reports from China first, which were quite distant, and then Italy. And Italy, the links are much stronger. So most of us, through 2 degrees of separation, know somebody in Italy. And certainly I was on a course with a friend who's based out of Milan, and getting texts from them saying, watch out.
Right, you see, because I think that for a lot of the British public, we were looking at that and saying, well, Italy's just been careless. And, this is just, China's a big country. It's got a lot of people in it. We're using all those excuses in February to sort of push this away and say it wouldn't happen here. Can you remember the day the first case came in that you were on?
Oh, gosh, if my memory was still that good, Jim, I'd be flying. No. No, I remember, I remember our early cases, and certainly I can remember what we've begun to have was an early flip, and what happened very quickly is we went from 1 to 10, and then we were there as hospitals around us started getting very full. So I remember Northwick Park, who's just down the road, and Northwest Thames has got an excellent regional network. And so very quickly we became a region to support each other, and they were getting berated and bashed. And it was that first weekend, and they really were. So they were having to spill into theatres immediately. They were having patients everywhere.
And this is a district general hospital, sort of up in the middle of Harrow, a pretty normal district general hospital, whereas the Hammersmith is the big sort of centre, like the John Radcliffe sort of thing.
A little bit. We're kind of one of the. We're linked with Imperial Healthcare. So Austin Mary's and Charing Cross would be like the JR and the Churchill and the Knock, and so we were perhaps a bit more protected from that first surge. Because at Hammersmith, we look after quite a niche couple of populations of patients, but very quickly we'd seen nothing like it. So I remember H1N1 flu, so bird flu. I remember that pandemic. I remember it was busy. We had half the ITU full of it. But I remember very quickly, after being 10 days in, it was almost a kind of a bit of a joke at handover. You kind of every day, so part of intensive care every day, we hand over the patients. The night team let us know what's happened. And, they normally give you a brief bio of the patients. And, we had Mr. Smith, COVID, Mr. Jones, COVID. And the whole unit within 10 days was full of COVID. Every bed, everybody. And that was kind of the first 10 days. And suddenly you go, wow, now we're full. And now we're spilling out immediately. So not only, and I've never seen anything like it, one disease, the whole.
So what do you do? Do you go to the hospital management and say, we need another ward?
So we started thinking about that, and we had most hospitals, I think, could kind of work out plan A, B, and C. And so what we did is we immediately, our colleagues in the cardiac intensive care unit, so they normally look after people who've been through big cardiac surgery or triple bypasses. So the first easy spill out, as it were, in inverted commas, was just to steal their ITU and let them help us, and they were brilliant. So we spilt there first, and then we filled there, and then we got to our next round where we had our kind of, if that's round B, we got to round C, where we kindly, our kind renal physicians left a ward for us, and we spilt out there. So so to put that in numerically, we would normally look after 15. We immediately filled to 16 on our unit, immediately added another 12 or 14 at the end in the cardiac unit, and then another 14 in the renal ward. And so you think we've effectively trebled the amount we're taking. And as I say, we were more protected than some around us.
Yeah, yeah.
And
the nature of intensive care changes. I mean, I still vividly remember a night in intensive care, the night my mother died, and watching the staff around us, and we were all allowed to crowd around the bed and sing and so on, and sing hymns to her and so on, which is a rather special moment as she passed. But there was no sense of protective equipment. No one was wearing a mask. This is 7 years ago, it was just a very different experience. When you've had an infectious disease in intensive care before, have you had to do the whole mask and visor and?
So no is the short answer to that. So historically, there are a clutch of conditions where you would wear level 2 PPE, of which I've met a trickle of them. We never normally get them in anything like the amount we need to spill this to everywhere. So normally, we're talking here Ebola, where we whisk them away very quickly, or MERS coronavirus, which I've looked after a couple of cases. But it's very easy to do a couple of cases because most ITUs have got at least one, if not two, side rooms that are available that ideally are what's called negative pressure, i.e. air is sucked in and stays in that room and then goes out a filter. So we've never had the same problem. And your point about visiting is a good one. I think one of the hardest bits of all of this was rightly very early on, visitors were banned into hospital, and actually that changed the work hugely because suddenly, so normally we might talk more intensive care. It's a funny place to be. Patients are very sick, and if you've ever had a loved one go through it, you can see it takes a toll of you to be that sick.
Yeah.
And they certainly look sick normally.
And it's a hushed place because of people being near the end somewhere in a bed somewhere. Yeah.
And they're kind of cathedratics. My father's favorite description of it is kind of cold and quiet and calm. But it does allow, when people see their relatives, to just over time appreciate how severe this is, whereas trying to get that across on the phone, and it's really hard. We had some very young people who we'd phone up their relatives, and it's so much harder for them to, I believe he's unfair because they, of course they understand, it was happening, they were in lockdown, but to kind of trust you when you're saying they're really, really unwell, is really, really scary. And what I was so struck by is how much of our communication is in a look, in a roll of the head.
And there's a body language is very important in that circumstance, isn't it? Looking compassionate as well as saying the right thing. Now, we've all become so familiar with the news reports, and the different symptoms have been discussed at length, but just remind us what the coronavirus causes. COVID-19, the disease, that's the D bit of the COVID, coronavirus disease. What does COVID-19 do to the body? Why is it so different? What makes it so different?
You're right. If we're going to be pernickety on each other, it's SARS coronavirus 2 is the virus, and COVID-19 is the disease syndrome when you get the virus. But I'll be honest, we're pretty lazy and flick between the two. So the scary or the difficult thing with this, so coronaviruses are a common virus. There's lots of coronaviruses out there. Indeed, I looked it up earlier. There's a beluga whale coronavirus, if people so coronaviruses in and of themselves are not a dreadful series of viruses. They are what they are. Interestingly, there is clearly something about them that is slightly special, because now we've had 3 what are called novel coronaviruses. So starting off with SARS, then MERS, so SARS coronavirus 1, then MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus, and now SARS coronavirus 2. And what was so odd about these is that they mutate, or they kind of jump in such a way that that as if none of us have got any backup immunity to it at all. And so even flu, normally we've picked up a bit of old cousins of flu, or flu as it was, and therefore we carry at least somewhere in the population a degree of immunity. And that was the problem with bird flu. It's such a big step, that amount of coverage was so small. Whereas what's been so terrifying with all these coronaviruses is that there's just no innate immunity. And that means that everybody can get it. And so, although thankfully on a population level this is not nearly as bad as MERS or SARS in terms of morbidity or mortality, the problem is the denominator. How many people can and probably will get infected is so big. And chiefly what it is it's a respiratory infection. So its primary site is to infect the epithelial or the mucosal edge cells in the upper and lower respiratory tract. And in most, it'll give a self-limiting illness where you get a cough, a bit febrile, and you get over it. What's odd about it, or what happens with it, as some viruses do, is that they can then get a systemic effect, i.e. they can then start affecting everywhere. And what's often difficult, or what has been difficult to unpick in the literature, is what's damage from the virus directly, and what is merely the body's defense system against the virus going and attacking everywhere.
So does it provoke the body to an immune response that is excessive, sort of thing?
Yes, and lots of bugs do that, and lots of people who get sick from bugs. That's what's making them sick, is a dysregulated immune response. And what we don't really know, or I don't know, and maybe beginning to be better elucidated, is, are the people who are getting really sick, are they responding in a funny way? Probably. Or are they really getting more virus? I think that group will be very small. I think it's much more common that there's going to be a large population of people who, for reasons we don't yet know, have an excessive response. And that's, when we get that in intensive care, we've seen that drag them down into what the technical term is multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. But effectively, these are the kind of news reports you read of kidneys failing, of COVID attacking my kidneys. It's worth also noting that the oddity about COVID, and where it is quite distinct with something like flu, is the length of time people seem to remain unwell with it. And that is really, really remarkable. So the number of survivors we've had who've been through over 50 days of intensive care, and to put that in context, so if you had a normal pneumonia, strep pneumonia, which is a bacteria, on average, you'd spend 5 days in intensive care.
Yeah, it's quite normal to hear of people coming out of intensive care quite quickly, isn't it? Or they've had a heart bypass, and then they've been in intensive care for a couple of days, and
exactly that. Whereas this has been quite unique, and that's one of the real challenges with the healthcare system around COVID. Has been, it takes us a long time to clear the plug and clear, and help get people through it, and that's
when you say clear the plug, what do you mean?
I kind of say one of the difficult things, and I suppose where we got to in London, and never quite got in Oxford, although we got very, very close, was the system being completely full.
Right.
So, every bed taken, every bed everywhere. And although we never got, I think, Northwest London is where I've got my personal experience. I suppose the best story to illustrate this is I got a phone call on about the third weekend into March, from a colleague over at one of our other DGHs, not Northwick. And they phoned me up and they said, our oxygen's running out. How many patients can you take and how quickly? We were right at the limit there of the system coping. And the problem is that you stay at the limit for a long time, because you can't, it's why people needed to lock down for so long, was that although numbers started to fall, it just takes a while for that to translate into intensive care beds.
And somebody who leaves intensive care on the road to recovery at the end of May might have contracted the disease at the beginning of April, sort of thing.
Yeah, or even March. And that's been a challenge, and that seems really quite unique in terms of intensive care diseases.
So let's just sort of look at this from the patient's point of view. Imagine that it's late April and I've contracted the coronavirus and developed symptoms of COVID-19. At what point, had that happened, say at the end of April, would I have been admitted to hospital? And then at what point would I have been admitted to ITU?
Yeah, so you've probably battled on at home now. So if you've got this, you've probably been sweaty, horrible, achy, coughing, not sleeping very well for about 5 days, probably battling on. And lots of our patients have done exactly that. We've tried really hard to stay out. And what you'll have found is that you're just getting progressively breathless. And often the driver to get admitted to hospital is that you're just getting too breathless to really cope at home. So, you know, the kind of very discriminating questions are, how many times do you stop going up a flight of stairs? And if you're, you know, twice, suddenly you think actually that really is, you're struggling. And so that probably gets you into hospital. And at that stage, we can be a bit more precise with the way we're judging this. And it's really on your blood oxygen level and really the amount of blood that's saturated with oxygen. And when you first come in, you'll probably respond to a relatively acceptable amount of oxygen. And some people, they stay there for a while and then got better, and some got a bit worse. And what lots of hospitals were able to do, and again, in both the major centres I was working at, we had a wonderful respiratory team who might be able to offer you the first stage of therapy, which is where you're on CPAP therapy. So this is a kind of tight-fitting mask. Kind of imagine your face with a kind of very tight mask. And it's a bit like having your head out of a car window driving at 80 miles an hour. So pushing air in and shoving it in, and you can shove in quite a lot of oxygen. And again, we saw lots of people respond really well to that level of therapy. And so often you've then maybe spent 72 further hours in hospital with physicians trying their very hardest with these kind of ways of getting you to oxygenate. For reasons that might sound a bit funny, something that can help is what's called proning. So we ask you to lie on your front. Yeah. And that can improve your amount of oxygenation, mainly because, put it simply, the air goes to a different bit of the lung that may not be as affected. And so we probably tried awake proning. And so for some people, this is very easy. I don't know if I find this madness to me that people sleep on their front.
No, only when I really can't sleep or it's really hot do I try that. Yeah.
But anyway, so you've tried all of that, and by this stage you're probably getting to where anytime you take off the mask, you're suddenly becoming incredibly breathless, incredibly dyspneic, incredibly tired. And that's when we would come and chat, and we'd explain that things are getting tiring, and we're going to move you onto a breathing machine. And that's normally when you'd come down to intensive care. And really what we found is that for most patients, there's then a pretty prolonged 1, 2, 3, sometimes even longer weeks of being held in a state of deep unconsciousness.
Most of the patients in intensive care would have been sedated.
To start with, yeah. So almost all, certainly during COVID, to start with, so to go onto a breathing machine, I need to deeply sedate you to get you onto it. And then particularly when at the beginning it needs to do all the work, later on, machines have got very clever now, and they'll share the work with you as we're waking you up. But we have many patients held in deep coma for a prolonged period, mainly because the COVID-19 infection had just made it so difficult for them to get oxygen from the air into their lungs. And the odd things about this were just how long that lasted for, and then in some got better, and in some that state of being hypoxic, which is just the technical term for low oxygen, would just stay as a kind of just the lungs are affected, nothing else. And sadly in others, lots of other organs would begin to dysregulate and fall apart. I often use the description at work. If you imagine that your body's a sheet, a stretched out bed sheet, and if you make any one organ go wrong, so if you pull down, if you just drew circles, lung, heart, kidney, liver, if you pull any circle down, all the others will come down into the hole with it. We're not really 25 separate organs. We're one body together homeostatically. And sadly, some would fall into a spiral of multi-organ failure that we couldn't stop. Others, we'd be able to help get through this long period of being critically unwell. And then you hit a really difficult phase of phase 2 of recovery. So if I make you, Jim, so we've admitted you down, we've got you through, we've had you in this deep coma for 3 weeks. As you then start to wake up, it's really difficult. And there's often the brain's a little bit scrambled from everything that's happened. And so there's a delirious, and certainly we saw lots of delirium in our patients. So that's
do they come back delusional? They're all sorts of.
Exactly that. And, this can range from anything from being completely withdrawn through to hallucinations. And often you'll be as weak as a kitten. So we've, if I lay you in bed for a week without moving, you lose 25% of your quadricep mass, your leg mass of muscle. And so our physios, they seem to perform miracles as far as I could tell. And then there's trying to stop you getting another infection on top of this, because that's often the problem in intensive care. Once you've been unwell, your immune system's not working quite as well as it could be. It's not in tip-top shape, and trying to keep you safe. So what it would look like is that at the first stage, you'd be deeply unconscious. You'd have a breathing tube in your mouth. We'd have a way of getting drugs into your system centrally. So we'd have a line in your neck, sometimes in another big vein. Often we'd be giving medicines that they look like a clear syringe. Actually, they're incredibly potent things to try and keep the heart going and undo often the damage we're doing from our sedation. Our sedation tends to chill the heart out, and we need it to keep going. And then a large percentage of our patients, somewhere up nearly almost 40%, would have a period where they might need a kidney machine. So 20 to 40% nationally. Ours is a bit lower locally, but and so you might have a machine behind you where blood just runs off and around. And that's what it would look like. And as I said, the really odd and hard thing would be that your loved ones wouldn't be there with you. And it was really difficult, this.
And for you as a consultant, that's also quite unnatural. Not to have any family there and have to do all of that on the phone and so on.
Yeah, in many ways, as I said, yes, it's the short answer. It's really unnatural. It's really difficult.
Now, what was the impact on you as staff? What impact did it have upon you? Because we were so aware, first of all, of trying to get enough PPE supplies. Did you have enough PPE in the 2 hospitals you were working in?
Yeah, I think we should both were well run. Imperial, because I had to share with London. Occasionally we got a bit closer to the edge, but we never got over it. And I think part of the privilege of being in intensive care is we were pretty protected compared to some of our colleagues. I think there were a couple of really difficult things for us as staff. There was a bit of fear. I think less than you might imagine, mainly because our PPE was good. I think what there was more of was fear at being unknown. Actually, part of what we do in intensive care is be in control as much as you can be, and suddenly you're faced with a disease you've never seen. I was trying to tot it up on the back of an envelope. I think we've got almost, just short of 1,000, or not, 700 odd years of intensive care experience amongst our consultant body in Oxford, and yet none of that had seen this disease before. And that suddenly really shakes you, because suddenly, when you're having to do a difficult decision, when you're having to keep going after 3 weeks of somebody being unwell, actually, when you've got no clinical thing to fall back on, that's really unsettling and really unnerving, and really hard. And normally, even if perhaps you don't have the help in your own hospital, there's somebody in the world who you could ask for help.
And what about the number of colleagues who actually caught the COVID-19 disease, and how much does that then add to the sense of crisis?
Yeah, that hurt more. I think we, like many trusts, we lost some, and that got harder. So I think at first there was this kind of fear of unknown, and then it did move into a phase of fatigue, timed with some pain, and we lost a number of staff members, and that changed the conversation subtly from actually crumbs. This is actually a little bit scary, and it opened up a thing of, wow, this is as I say, most intensive cares, we don't work with Ebola. Royal Free do that, and so they're kind of working with a real risk of infectious disease.
For the first time, you're going into a hospital, risking your life in doing so, and you hadn't really had a sense of that before. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I think it's certainly, or it's such a rare occurrence to get a hospital-acquired infection that affects staff is so rare.
Yeah.
And that is really heartbreaking. And I think what you see in these, when it got really hard, was, hard times drive together a good team and break apart a bad one. I have the privilege of being in a brilliant intensive care, and actually, even when fatigue started really setting in, and I think that's what got hard towards the end, as people got very fatigued. Actually, the team drove together over these tougher times, and it was really that middle bit where it got quite tough.
Now, I want to leave other people to ask their questions about, your experience of being at the front line of COVID, and just to say to people who are watching on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, you can post your questions in the comments section, and if you are with us on Zoom, you can post your comments in the chat function. So any questions you've got, by all means, type them in and we'll come back to them. But I want to just sort of pause at this point and come back to Andrew Chadwick, really, and tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you start life?
Well, I often joke with my juniors that I always I'll buy them a coffee if they can guess where I was born from my accent. Well, I was actually born in Liverpool.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah. No. I did leave there when I was 4, but I have remained an Everton fan, so perpetually disappointed at football.
I know one man who'll be very pleased about that, and several who'll be very disappointed. Yeah.
And then we moved as a family down to South London, and I grew up in a bit of suburban South London called Bromley. I've got a brother and my dad, and my mum was around at that stage.
And you grew up in a Christian home. You were taken to church?
Yeah, so I went to a wonderful church. I always wondered if it was just because it was around the corner. I don't think so. It was a lovely church that taught from the Bible, called Christ Church Bromley, and that was a brilliant place to grow up. Although I think if you got 11-year-old me, I would have had a different response. I don't think I enjoyed it then. But I remember transitioning as I got just into my later or mid-teens. I had some wonderful youth group leaders, and we used to go on kind of summer activity camps. It seems a long way away from times.
Oh, thinking about a summer camp. There's a nice thought. Yeah.
Indeed.
So this is sort of what sort of age that God is starting to
so this is about,
convict you?
Yes, this is 14, 15-year-old me. And I can remember it to this day. There was the way these camps work, for those who haven't done them, is there's loads of activities and games, and then there'd normally be a series of talks in the evening running through an explanation of what is the gospel, what is the good news. And I remember there was a talk on a bit of the Bible in Romans that says that no one is good, not even one. All have turned away. And it suddenly hit me that although I thought I was really quite a nice guy, actually what I wasn't is perfect. What I wasn't as good instinctively, actually, in the secret dark corners where no one's watching, I don't always pick the kind and loving thing. I might often pick the selfish me. And I remember that night thinking, actually, look, I'm not a good guy, essentially. I'm a nice guy, but not a good guy. And then hearing an amazing talk the next day of how the Christian faith is not about being the good guy. What it's about is having the Lord Jesus who came to die, who was the good guy, who was the perfect guy, and saying, Andrew, I'll take all the blame for every bad thing you've ever done. I'll take it all from you, and you can have my good credit. And I remember hearing that talk, and I just remember that in my head made sense. How can you explain a world that has so much beauty and amazing things, and at the same time has so much horribleness? And it does have horribleness, and actually a God who comes into that world, who dies on a cross. Well, that made sense of both those things to me at age 15. And then life went really quite tits up, actually, if I can say that one. And my mum got very sick. But I remember really clinging to the fact that actually my God knows what it's like to be really sick and to be really in pain. Indeed, one of my favorite verses to this day is still Jesus wept.
To some people, to lots of people, that's an expletive. We tend to, tends to get passed by. It's the shortest verse in the Bible, it's just 2 words, but actually it describes the compassion of God very powerfully, doesn't it? And
and that meant that this truth held true for me. Even I can still remember to this day, we were driving back it was Christmas Eve. My poor dad, stuck with 2 teenage sons on Christmas Eve, and we made a Monopoly tour of London. She was in the Royal Marsden Hospital in Chelsea, and so we tried to drive past everywhere on London. To this day, we never got Fenchurch Street Station, which I've now found where it is.
Wow, there you go. We managed to get even the Old Kent Road. There you go.
Oh yeah, we got there. But even at that moment, actually having a God who was compassionate, who understood my pain and everybody's pain, because he went through pain himself to save me, and that's the God I still trust in today.
And so you had to make that decision for yourself. It wasn't something that was just, mum and dad are Christians, I'll be a Christian, and I'll sort of get a family pass kind of thing.
No, absolutely. I say it was that realization that it isn't just about being good, being nice, getting to church on a Sunday. I would have ticked all those boxes, but actually it was about a personal choice to say, actually, I'm not good.
Now, you see, most people would look at a doctor and they would say, doctor, not good. They would, if you actually ask people to sort of create a pillar of the best and the worst, the doctors and the consultants, especially the intensive care consultants, would be up there at the top, wouldn't they? And nurses as well, but it's more personal than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's about that. Yes, I think as a bunch we're quite nice. But I think being good is instinctively something different to nice, and it's that sense of, actually, if you believe like I do that there's a God who made the world, actually being good would be recognizing that creator. It'd be right to do that. That's only right, and that certainly 14-year-old me was not living in a way that recognized my creator, and you may think I'm good. I don't know if my wife's in the Zoom. She might well perk up and give a list of things that give a list
She's
of things.
Currently muted, but
but actually, if you could see every bit of my life, if it was all out there on YouTube, well, actually, you'd see that there's lots of bits of me that aren't good and that are unkind or lazy.
Now, as a young Christian, then you became a Christian at what, the age of 16?
Yeah, probably 15. Yeah, 15,
16, and then your mother has cancer and she dies when you are 17.
Yeah.
Did that shake your faith?
I think paradoxically not. Actually, I think no. I don't know why. It shook lots of me, and it hurt me deeply. But I remember, even when it really hurt, and it certainly didn't make it not hurt. It really hurt. I wept regularly. But even in those times, the factual truth of a God who died for me, and the making sense of how that makes sense of how the world can be both good and bad in the same coin. And the way I think that the cross of Jesus makes sense of that never stopped being true to me. And though there were periods that I probably wouldn't have felt very Christian, if that's a useful phrase, actually, I always knew that I was, because I knew that my Lord had still saved me. and so though, no, it shook lots of me, but it didn't shake my faith per se.
And then a year later than that, you go off to medical school.
Yes,
in Oxford.
Yeah, I ran to Oxford and went to med school for 6 years here.
How did that affect your faith? And you're going away from home, going away with some of your roots torn up, and going away from home, settling into life in Oxford. How did your faith get challenged by life in medical school?
I think there are kind of two distinct challenges. That there was a challenge of choosing to live it or not, and I went quite closely after Mum's death. It was actually the same summer, and that's not a great, and there are bits of the way I lived that you think, actually, if my faith were a scorecard, I'd have lost. But actually, as we talked about, faith isn't a scorecard. Well, it is. It's Jesus' scorecard, not mine. And so it certainly challenged me in that sense. I think it also challenged me. It also rewarded me enormously. I was really privileged. I on the advice of my minister back in Bromley, I went to one of the great churches. There are loads of great churches in Oxford. I went to one and found a wonderful program of teaching that continued what I'd already been given in Bromley, showing that actually the Bible is the richest book on earth, and it's complex and brilliant, and as you read it, you see more of amazing the layers of this man Jesus, and it was a privilege. And I met some amazing friends, and eventually Lindsay worked out who I was in church and met her.
There you go. So you both had a lot to thanks and Evs for. Yeah. Now, therefore, when after many twists and turns in the road, you find yourself, in charge of an intensive care ward in the middle of the COVID-19 emergency, with staff bearing these huge burdens and so on, how does your faith shape your response to that and the way that you deal with patients?
Yeah, I think there are two. I suppose there's one moment that illustrates it best. I remember it was quite early on, so I'm a relatively junior consultant, and we're in a new disease. And I remember I'd been on a ward round where everybody seemed to have got sicker that week. Normally, you look after intensive care for a period of 4-7 days, depending on where you are. And I was coming to the end of my kind of 5-day stretch, and no one had got better. And we were really kind of beginning to stretch at what do we do? What can we do? We don't know. And I remember that moment of watching a few colleagues, this kind of slight despair come in that actually we've never been like this before. Normally there's always some knowledge to fall back on, some scientific right that's going to show and prove. Whereas actually, I remember going back to I was staying, I couldn't go home at the time. Poor Lindsay, our youngest, had a fever, so I was living somewhere else so I could keep working and not have to self-isolate. I remember going back to the room I was staying in a lovely friend's house, and being able to just pray and know that, yes, I don't know what I'm doing. And there's a very unnerving feeling on a ward round when you're meant to be the one who knows what to do, when actually you've got to be honest and say, I don't know. I don't know if it's desperately right. What I do know is that I think it's the best. And I remember having a chance to really openly pray and thank God that actually even COVID is under his grasp. He does know, and he'll look after me making decisions. And there's a passage that promises that God does everything for our good. Now that doesn't mean everything's going to be nice. 17-year-old me knows that's not true. But what it does mean is that ultimately, actually, he's not going to let it be dreadful and awful for my personal development to more as his son. And so that was one thing it really did. So my faith allowed me to in uncertainty, have something to grasp, some solid ground of which to find it. I think the second really helpful thing was, if you had the phases of the outbreak, you had phase one where it was coming, it was nervous, it was exciting noise because we were having to, we literally built walls in places, put fans in places to make extractors. That was good.
There's a sense of action and something tangible. Yeah, yeah.
Then you had kind of round one of filling up, where there was this kind of fear and pandemonium, and then there was kind of round three. And I suppose this, was when people were beginning to say, "Oh, shouldn't we be opening lockdown now?" And actually, people were getting tired, really, really tired. We'd worked people so hard. We'd worked so hard. And it was then that people were just beginning to get frayed. And I remember, it's that combination of fear, because by this stage, we've had some staff members get very sick. We've had some die. We've asked people to do night after night after night shift. And actually at that moment, to be able to try and just find another level of energy. And that's when I didn't have any energy left, and actually being able to turn and see that actually there's a promise that there's a spirit that can work through me to then be loving, even when I felt pretty burnt out and pretty exhausted. Was a real joy to be able to grasp onto that. And I remember sharing that with one of my Christian juniors, just that moment of that relief that actually there's another energy to pull on, the Lord Jesus and his spirit.
Now, of course, the public have had this huge response to what the NHS has done. You have been the nation's heroes. We've had the Thursday night bang and crash and clap. What do you make of the public's adulation of the NHS?
I think there are two halves to it. I think the thanks are enormously appreciated. So I think, and certainly, I think as consultant, all I want to do is hold up the team that have worked far beyond anything they should have done, and thanks is really great. I find the hero stuff slightly difficult, if I'm honest, in that we are doing a job we're paid for. It's a job we love. We have a privilege of a job we absolutely love, and there are loads of jobs out there that the world needs to keep running. That that are just as important to the great cog of it all. And I found the kind of slight transition from thanks, which I think was really appreciated. And I don't want to, I think we look really ungrateful when we kind of say anything but. And I thought the lady who started it, the way she finished it, just showed exactly that. It was about thanks, and that was brilliant. But I thought the way it merged into everybody wanting a hero, I thought kind of is an interesting thing, and actually showed that at times of uncertainty, we want to try and find heroes.
I suppose for me, that walking around the neighbourhood here in Didcot and seeing, the rainbows in the windows and everybody coming out on a Thursday evening, this was something that brought everybody together as an expression of something. And if you take God out of the picture and you have no common experience of worship, you need something spiritual to replace it, don't you? Maybe tonight we don't have quite as many viewers because they're all watching the playoff final for between Oxford and High Wycombe. I don't know, but there are things that we substitute for God that have to kind of serve the same purpose, and they can't quite do it, can they?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably my discomfort with the hero, in that I instinctively know that, yes, I love the NHS. I love the AUH. I think it's a great trust. I think it does amazing work. But I think if you hold us up as your hero, we'll fail you, because we're not that good. We can be many things, but we can't quite be the hero. We can't fix all your problems. In COVID, we really can only fix one of them. And even that we could only do sometimes. Whereas you're right. I think what it showed is that people, there is a yearning, isn't there? And I certainly see that in friends. There's a yearning for something that does have the answers. And yeah.
Do you think there's a sense in which the whole crisis has been used by God to humble our hubris You know, the sense that we can solve all our problems, and actually we're getting to a point of realizing that we can't.
I think it certainly should do that. I don't know whether it will. I think there is that truth, isn't there? You know, certainly, you know, our culture trusts education to fix all problems. You know, that is the answer to everything. And you know, don't get me wrong, my brother and father, as I like to wind them up, are professional geeks and researchers. You know, science has loads of brilliant things. I love science. But you're right, what it isn't is the panacea to everything. And I think this outbreak shows exactly that. And what
we're really grateful for everything that happens in Didcot, in our wonderful biomedical science companies, and you know, the vaccine is being manufactured over at Harwell, and we're going to be depending on it, aren't we? We're really grateful for these things.
Yeah.
But that's the most that we can do.
Yeah, and you know, yeah, you're right. We mustn't get translated to saying something we're not here. You know, science is brilliant. It's amazing. But,
and it's a gift from God.
Yes, exactly. And we're on the same team in that sense. But what it isn't is the end.
Now, one of the things when we've been talking before this evening that's really come through, and by the way, you know, get writing your questions on the comments, the live chat on YouTube, and put up questions on chat on Zoom for those of us that are on Zoom. One of the questions we've talked about is, you are in ITU. You can see that the patient is on a downward trajectory, as my mother was when she was admitted to intensive care. We came in Guildford in 2013 as a Christian family who realized that mum was dying and who wanted to sit round her bed and sing the 23rd Psalm, you know, and some wonderful hymns quietly in the confines of the ward. How many people are actually ready to think about death?
I think my favourite illustration of this comes from pre-COVID times. Actually, I remember I looked after a wonderful lady called Betty. That was not her real name. And Betty came in and she had a very severe pneumonia, and we treated Betty overnight. Betty was 97, and she passed away very peacefully of this very severe pneumonia. And I remember her next of kin came in the next morning, and it was a lovely niece and nephew who clearly loved Betty. And I remember being really struck by their phrase when I said, "Terribly sorry, Betty's passed away," and their response was, "We just didn't see it coming." And I remember starting sitting there going, "She's 97, like, you know, just do the math." But there is, I mean, that's slightly tongue in cheek. They were, as I say, they were lovely about it.
But that's very common as a reaction, isn't it? You know, when I've been helping people to prepare for funerals, I've often, you know, "Oh, we weren't ready for this," you know, and you.
No, and I remember, you know, and I think COVID's brought it home too. Whenever you come to intensive care, our national mortality is about 20%, 15 to 20%. So 1 in 5 patients will die, and therefore, you know, we will always, or not quite always, we'll almost always at least flag up that it might happen, because that's the nature of being in this very critical environment. And what was hard with COVID was doing that over the phone and doing that kindly and caringly, because, you know, 80% will survive, and a little less in COVID. But you're right, instinctively, increasingly, people have got further from being willing to acknowledge and talk about it, isn't it? I think it's Groucho Marx's thing, you know, the only two certainties are death and taxes. And
was it Woody Allen said, "I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens." And I think that's a lot of people's attitude, isn't it?
It is, and that, you know, that makes it harder when people haven't ever talked about it. And I remember being in an amazing talk when I was back training. I'd run away. There was a beginning of my training back in London, and it was from a survivor of intensive care. And there are often wonderful talks about how difficult it is. And he was just saying how being sure of your own faith is important, because when it gets uncertain, you need that to fall back on. And actually, what you don't want to do is not be sure you've made your decisions and you've made them properly as an adult in a meaningful way.
So in a moment we'll open up to other people's questions if they have some, but what sort of spiritual lessons should we be learning as a country from this experience? I can't think of anything in life that I've lived through, and whether it's the Falklands War or the Gulf War or 9/11 or anything that's been remotely like this. And I guess it is nearer to an experience of war because it affects everybody, total war, and death taking people, left, right and center, 40,000, 45,000, maybe 60,000 people. What sort of spiritual lessons should we be learning, do you think?
I suppose the things that I hope we don't lose is I hope we don't lose the realization that we're not able to fix everything very easily, that we're not that clever, and that we're just human, that we're just dust to dust, as I think the old prayer book would go. And so I hope that opens up a hubris, the slight hubris of humanism, that humans can somehow solve every problem. I hope it opens up questions about, well, if that's not the case, what can? I also do hope that it allows that as we kind of reopen a little bit, I hope that the busyness of trying to get life reopened, and it's really important, isn't it? Businesses need to work, as I spoke about earlier, that the cogs need to work. But I hope that the fragility of life, as I say, though many of the victims of COVID are elderly, they're not only elderly. And I hope that the frailty of life is something people can honestly talk about. And I suppose my one, I don't love these kind of, I don't love talking about work in great detail, but my kind of prayer for people listening to this would be to ask the question, have you got a personal philosophy that deals with death robustly? And I think the way to do that is the Lord Jesus, because he came, he died, and he rose, and therefore he can robustly give you the answer to death. I hope that the fear of COVID, and it's a terrifying thing, isn't it, to have a virus that's unstoppable, seemingly, that hopefully will be stopped with a vaccine. I'd love that. That'd be brilliant. And the group doing it here in Oxford, they are really good at doing this kind of thing. And so that's really, that'd be brilliant. But I hope this kind of wake-up call that actually, my prayer would be people can kind of go, actually, look, if I don't have that, well, I need to find that. And whether that's actually as a grown-up, an adult, reading Mark's Gospel, I don't know what that is. I think my personal spiritual lesson was that moment of being able to find somewhere to turn when all of life was chaos. Imagine, I like to think I know what I'm doing in an intensive care unit. I've been trained by amazing people for over a decade in doing exactly that. And yet there we were, unsure of what to do. And for me, the spiritual lesson of knowing that even at the most uncertain time, just like it was when I was 17 and Mum died, actually my God is still the solid foundation from which I can then springboard back and be loving and be kind through his strength in difficult times. So they'd be my thoughts for a wider world and my own personal thoughts.
Well, the YouTube chat function is being very quiet as far as questions are concerned. Here we go. Have you had opportunities to share your faith during the worst time of COVID-19?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's often a pretty difficult time to share faith. I think what I've found is it's easier to find faith that you rely on to others. I think in part it's starting somewhere new, isn't it? There's a lovely idea in that faith is backed up with works, and they take a bit of time. So there have been a couple of moments. I think the NHS is getting an increasingly difficult space to share one's personal faith.
Yeah, for understandable reasons. And
understandable, and
yeah,
we don't take advantage. But I have had a couple of good chats with the staff members. So I think it's often difficult with patients. I think that's one's got to be very careful at not taking it, being seen to take advantage of difficult times for them. But yeah, with a couple of staff members, there's an ability to just kind of, say, what did you do on Sunday? Well, actually, I had a Zoom church, and actually that really helped me. It helped me because we had a really clear message of a saviour.
And of course, we have to be careful in hospital. We don't necessarily pray for a patient while we are with them, sort of thing, because again, that's taking advantage, isn't it? Really. And,
I think that probably is a difficult talk, but I think my personal read would be that what we must never do is be seen to be pushing ourselves on vulnerable. That's not the way. But that's not
absolutely
the way this works. It's not the way we want to work. So, but certainly with other staff members, actually just the ability to be honest about one's own struggles. And I think I think the most powerful thing is showing weakness, and that showing personal weakness, because I've got a saviour who's really strong.
Now, do you think there's going to be a bit of a tidal wave of stress-related problems amongst NHS staff? Do you think as we return to whatever some measure of normality is, do you think it's going to be now that the stress comes out? I think, or has that already been happening?
I think we're seeing it. I think we see it. I think we see fatigue in a deep sense. I think there will be. I think I hope we never quite got to the absolute war standards we felt we might. So there were some modelling data that suggests we might be taking multiple tens of admissions a day, and to put that in context, we might take 3 a day normally. And having to start making rationing decisions, and we never got there. We never got there. We were able to take everybody we felt was right to take to intensive care. So I hope the psychological damage won't be as bad. I think there are. I think there are. We see it working through. I think by the end, we as a team were pretty burnt out. And the problem is we started this running at 100% before, and in many ways it's much harder now trying to get back to normality, because the things we normally do are really important. They're cancer surgery, they're big operations, they're big trauma that people are now beginning to do silly things again, and not silly if people choose to do.
Road accidents could easily put somebody in ITU.
Yeah, that kind of thing, or falling off ladders, and we see lots of that, and that's all ramping right back up. And what's been hard is there hasn't really been, because there's just no time to stop and allow us to pause. And so I don't know when it might happen, but I think certainly around the country, people are finding it just beginning to hit people, and that's a really waffly answer to that question, which is a really good question.
No, that's fine. And do you think we really need to be planning for a second wave? We need to anticipate the reality of that.
I think all we can do is look at, I think, this virus hasn't gone anywhere. I hope, I'm a glass half full kind of character. I hope that you should be able to shift the R number with very small changes in personal. It doesn't take a lot for a whole population to help move the R number quite well by social distancing, and I really hope that people will just do the easy bits and be sensible. And I hope, therefore, so I don't think we'll see anything. We shouldn't see anything like we did before. And I think the fact that they're willing to do local lockdowns is probably the way forward. Will it be more? Yes. Are we planning for more to come back in? Yes. It'll come back, and it's not gone yet until we get.
And it's interesting that in countries that are having winter at the moment, in the sort of southern hemisphere countries, so that it suddenly seems to be rising again in South Africa. We've had the cases in Melbourne and so on, and these are countries where they're also very much. I follow South Africa on Twitter, one or two key people on Twitter, and they're sort of saying, right, tomorrow it's going to be really cold in Johannesburg, and it's their winter, and this, as we've seen with the meatpacking plants and so on, it's a virus that spreads easily in low, above freezing temperatures, sort of thing.
And my skill set is not epidemiology, but I think so what I can say is we're certainly prepared. I think we'll be better prepared. I think there's lots to be said for, it's that. I'm trying to think of a non-twee example. Whenever you do something a second time, it's always easier. I would say running marathons, but I've not done that. So, the second time you do.
I think if I ran a marathon, I'd be needing your care very quickly. So there you go.
But as I say, I'm a glass half full. So I think we'll be more prepared. We'll have more of a sense of we know what to expect, and certainly by the end, the stress of looking after a brand new disease was overwhelming. That it's hard enough when you kind of think you know what you're doing, when you really aren't sure, and every decision you're not really sure because you've never seen this before. Whereas now, we've got through 50 patients, many of whom, and I say our local data has been excellent.
And that's 50 patients in intensive care.
Yeah.
I'm told that there were like 2 entire floors of the hospital that were occupied, and that's beyond intensive care.
Yeah,
that's the COVID wards.
Yeah, we also had 2 intensive cares, so that's just one of them. So we had doubled that for intensive care numbers, and then inpatients we stole everything. So that for those who've been to Oxford, it's how to put it politely, it's a architectural gem. For those who've seen it,
yes, it's not one of my favourite hospital buildings. No,
you couldn't design a less attractive building, I think.
You really couldn't. And when you're lost in the middle of it and it's dark and you're not near a window, yes.
No, but it's big, and you're right. Entire floors were full of COVID. We then had 2 intensive cares and a brand new respiratory HDU.
What's an HDU?
So
high dependency
unit.
Yeah,
we took all of those. And so it was full, and I say, it really was full. We weren't, we never quite got to breaking point, but we were full. One disease.
Yeah, and we should remember countries that don't have a hospital like the JR, where the JR is normal. The John Radcliffe Hospital is a normal hospital across the UK, isn't it? Really, you think about South Africa, you think about countries like India. Where testing will be much less common, and where medical facilities will depend on a lot of economic factors and so on. Yeah, it's a very, very different situation. Well, we're coming to the end. Just let me say to anybody who's watching, who may be just bumping into Grace Church Didcot for the first time, and indeed bumping into Christianity for the first time. I mean, you may not be watching this live, you may be watching it, I was going to say on catch up, but the recording will be there on YouTube, and so you may be watching this at a later date, and we're glad that you've joined us for that. Grace Church Didcot is a new church in Didcot. We started slowly in the summer of 2018. We started holding Sunday services last year, and until lockdown, we were meeting every week at 5 o'clock in Gem's school, and now we meet at the same time, 5 o'clock on YouTube, here on our YouTube channel. We're looking forward to getting back if we can, but we are dependent on the local authority because we are hoping to rent a community centre with more space. Meanwhile, if you've never encountered the claims of Jesus for yourself, then have a copy of one of these, either Luke's Gospel or John's Gospel. We would love to give you one if you're local here to Didcot. Weather forecast for tomorrow is good. I'm hoping to have my table outside Asda, so come along and get one of those. Here's a booklet called Ultimate Questions that introduces some of the claims of the Christian faith, and a book here that's recently published called Beyond the Big C. by Jeremy Marshall. Jeremy is a cancer patient. He's had terminal cancer now for 6 or 7 years, and he's been very well treated by the Marsden. And this is his story of experiencing cancer and dealing with the same issues that COVID presents. How do we deal with death? How do we deal with life not working out as we had intended it to? So if you like one of those books and you live in Didcot, do come and find me outside Asda, or come and visit one of our services. We'll be glad to get you one of those. And we're going to say goodbye to everybody on YouTube. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your time. We really appreciate your time and your input. And thank you very much for spending time with us this evening. So goodbye to everybody on